She needs a date to her best friend's gala. He wants to settle down. Can they get past their hang-ups to see that they should be together? This is the premise of The Accidental Swipe by me, Y.M. Nelson. This steamy contemporary romance features Jason and Fortune, two people who've given up on love and are urged to use an online dating app to find someone. When they find each other, the attraction is undeniable, but their jaded outlooks on love based on past emotional hurt may keep them from getting together. The Accidental Swipe releases on July 25th, 2023. Go to ymnelson.com for all of the latest details. This is the Nerdy Romantics Podcast, and I'm your host, Y.M. Nelson. Today we are going to talk about a few of our favorite books from the Who Gets An HEA series. So for those who are just joining, this is probably a good time to talk about this series a little bit. Who Gets An HEA series, we've been doing it for a few episodes. We are talking about romances that we recommend that feature marginalized main characters. So they can be marginalized in whether they're LGBTQ, whether they have physical or mental different abilities, whether they are racially different from our norm, which is the 20-something, young, skinny, heterosexual couple. So we're doing anything that kind of differs from that for any of our marginalized communities out there, because I believe in representation and I believe that everybody deserves love, so we should actually be showing that. So this time around, we're going to talk about some of our favorites, which is going to kind of have the gamut. And we have with us Marcie, Staci, and Dana, guest hosts, and we have a new nerdy romantic guest host with us, Mary. So Mary, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am Mary Warren, and I run the website Fat Girls in Fiction. And this kind of started during COVID when we were all trapped inside. And I read the book, spoiler alert, which I'm going to talk about today, and it just showed me that I'd never seen fat people talked about in a positive way before in books. So it just kind of set me on this whole thing. And so now I make TikToks and I talk about fat representation. And then I also have a book coming out that will have wonderful fat representation as well, called A Highlander for Hannah. So.
Oh, neat. And I just saw the cover for that. I was like, oh, I love that cover.
I'm really proud of it.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you named the cover designer, because I then went to the cover designer's Instagram account. And we will have all of this info in our show notes at nerdyromanticspodcast.com. But I went to the Instagram account for your cover designer, and she has amazing designs, and she shows a lot of representation, which that's what we're all about here. So I'm so happy about that. And of course, because this is our first, you'll see a few clips of our video, because this is going to be our first video podcast. How about we introduce to some and just reintroduce to the rest of our audience our nerdy romantic hosts who've been with us for a little while. So Staci, tell us a little bit about yourself.
You had to start with me.
I always do.
I know, and I'm never prepared for it. My name is Staci, and I have been a friend of Yvonne for decades now.
Yes.
For a while now. And I joined Nerdy Romance because you asked us. And it's really opened up a lot for me as in reading, because for a while there, I really was not reading a lot. And then it was kind of the same thing. And so actually, our first book, we started talking about it, made me actually start more reading romance novels, because I had put those down for a long time. Um, and one of the books that I'm going to talk about is like one of the first books that I read after our initial session, and I started
Yep.
reading a particular author, which I'll talk about later. And that's how I started to get back into it. But been a friend for you for years, and really, I guess not from the beginning of Nerdy Romantics, but fairly early, we've all been here, and I
Yep.
really enjoy this.
Yep. Okay, Marcie, how about you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, I'm Marcie. I am also a friend and I'm an avid reader. So when you offered us this opportunity to talk about books, I was, of course, gang for being part of this process. And I also agree with Staci that it has reminded me to expand my horizons when it comes to the types of books that I read. And so I do appreciate that part of this because we've been able to touch on a lot of different types of books. It has also reminded me of the comparisons between books and movies and being able to appreciate the different genres and how things are represented in one versus the other. So again, I'm grateful to be a part of Nerdy Romantics, and I'm looking forward to this discussion today as well.
Awesome. Dana, tell us about yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Dana. And so I think I'm kind of oddball in the nerdy romantics that I love to read. I've always been an avid reader. When I was young and kids were out playing, I was in the house or maybe outside, but I had a book in my hand. I always have a book in my hand. I've got all these pictures of when I was a little kid. Books, books, books. But I think I'm an oddball in that I don't do as much of the romance reading. I like romance, but I like it mixed like with thriller, maybe some horror, some different things like that. You'll notice with my book selection, it may lean a little not as romantic as maybe some of the others. I'm also not a writer. I'm a reader and a critic because being a critic is so much easier. Joking. And then I will say, Staci didn't mention this, but Staci and I are also part of a podcast that actually does movie reviews. Again, easier to be a critic. And that's the L5 podcast. And you can find us on YouTube.
I will actually have the link for their podcast on the show notes for this episode. So I think what I'm going to do is kind of start us off with our book recommendations. What we do with these recommendations, of course, we give the title and we give the author of the book. We make sure we talk about, of course, the main characters of it. But really, what we want to do is talk about why we recommend it. So we give a little bit of book description, try not to spoil it. We want to make sure that we talk about why we like these characters as good representations of their marginalized communities, or why we just like these characters in general. And we also like to mention things if we see tropes, because a lot of romance readers love their tropes and they will read straight into a specific trope. Any kind of things that would kind of stand out if somebody was, looking for this book. So it could be tropes. It could also be trigger warnings. We may say something about that. We definitely talk about heat level, like what we think the heat level is for a book. These are kind of all the things we want to touch on. I'm going to start off with my book, which is Misadventures of a Curvy Girl, and it's by Sierra Simone. If you haven't heard of this series, the Misadventure series is 32 or 33 books, but it's a multi-author series, so the books are all standalone books. I did want to mention the cover, or at least talk about the cover. This book, the first thing that caught my eye was the cover of this book, because I had not really seen a book cover with a plus size. I wouldn't even say plus size model, but I think she is a plus size model. She does have an Instagram account, but it's an actual photo of a plus size person on a book, right? Instead of like, we have the illustrated characters or whatever on a book. We actually kind of see the photo of a plus size person. So we actually see a real plus size person on a book. So that was the first thing I was like, oh my gosh, I like this cover. But that's what started me reading this book. I had never read anything by Sierra Simone. So that was an eye opener when I first started this book. So basically, the book description is that the female character, this is actually an MFM romance. So that means two males and a female, as a throuple, if you will, a romance. So you have your LGBTQIA representation. You also have, of course, your plus size representation here, which is what got me to the book. When I read the book description, I thought, okay, so which guy is she gonna end up with? Because I was like, this was all new to me, just totally new to me. So I started reading, and I was just totally hooked. I was totally hooked from the first two chapters in the book. Sierra Simone is an erotic romance writer, and she writes a lot of alternate lifestyle kinds of things like BDSM. She writes, LGBTQ representation. She has this one series that is like 6 people in the series, so there's at least one orgy scene in there. So if erotic romance is not your thing, Sierra Simone is not for you. But if you're okay with erotic romance, this particular book is what I think is, I would say, is a little bit of tamer, one of her books, but it's also an amazing story. So the female main character, Ireland, she's of course plus size, and she is at the point in her journey where she has accepted that she is plus size. And I know we've talked a lot about on this podcast, because we've talked about a couple of plus size books where we're like, what? Why is this person so whatever? But what I've realized as I've been reading the different plus size books is that, or books with plus size main characters, is that a lot of them are written wherever this person is on the journey and whatever the author wants to say about being plus size or about this character being plus size. So everybody's not at the same point in the journey. As a plus size person, I'm a little bit past this point of I'm just now accepting who I am as a plus size person. I'm a little bit past that point. There are a few things that bother me about being perceived as plus size in the world. They don't really necessarily hit me or hit my psyche or anything internally, but then I'm not in the place of this main character, which this is a small town. This ends up being a small town romance, even though she's not from a small town. Even as I was reading it, she is on that acceptance journey, but she's aware of, hey, I love this pencil skirt. But as she meets the first hero that she meets, which is Caleb, he is a country boy, he's a farmer, and he loves plus size women. He loves their curves, he loves everything about them. So when she meets him, she is very aware of like the size skirt that she's wearing. She's aware of it. He's not aware of it like that, but she is, so she's still in that kind of, I'm accepting, but I'm still aware kind of part of being plus size. I can understand that. I could kind of get with that. But really what drew me to this book and kind of what kept me reading was not just the sex scenes, which are done very well, by the way. But that did keep me reading as well, because I was like, okay, what is this about? But but they did keep me reading. But also just the whole story, the story of them being together. So after she meets Caleb, who's just a regular old country boy, she is actually on her way. She's a photographer, and she is on her way out to their farm because she's taking pictures for a Chamber of Commerce. This is in Kansas, for a Chamber of Commerce promo kind of thing. And so she's on her way out to this farm where Caleb is. Caleb and Ben stay there, but we don't meet Ben until later. So Caleb comes in and she meets him. And of course, there's sparks. Of course, there's a lot going on there. Then there's this big storm, and the storm actually traps them there. So the trope of forced, that just one bed kind of trope, forced proximity, I believe is the name of the trope, that is there immediately. And so she's trapped there because this storm is coming in. And when this storm comes in, then Ben comes home. So Ben is ex-military. He has PTSD. So there's another layer of marginalization there because you've got mental differences there, and he deals with stuff mentally different than others who don't have PTSD. And he comes home and it's an electric scene or whatever, but then she realizes that these guys kind of come as a package deal, but they have not really, they've had a relationship together and it does not work out. It doesn't work out unless there's a female there. So for me, this was what started out as an appreciation of this whole plus size, representation. What started out as that ended up also being a little bit of an education for me, because I don't know how these relationships work. But also it was written in a way where you not only see, the physical part of it, but you see how they interact with their small town. And it's almost as if they're an other. So it's like, if you really know that you are LGBTQIA, you're in that spectrum of then, and you know that it's not an easy life. Just like for me being a Black woman, it's not an easy life, right? And you kind of see that throughout. They're almost treated as, oh, it's them, because it's a small town, right? Oh, it's them. And then it's like they almost have to defend their relationship to a certain extent. And that gave me a little bit more of an appreciation for what it means to be in that headspace, So I highly recommend this for people who like erotic romance, who appreciate a well-done plus-size character, who also just appreciate the whole kind of alternative lifestyle that's presented here, but really who just want a good romance story, because Sierra Simone she writes a good romance. She's very emotional. She shows that story arc so well. It's just well done, and it's a page turner too.
I do have a question though.
Yes.
Okay, yes. So so it's a throuple, and yes. Since I've started, reading the different romance novels, and you start getting on different authors, and I've read 2 so far that had throuples, plots. 2 of them. So I was just thinking, when you said, "Oh, it's definitely spicy," have you read a throuple, anything like that wasn't erotic? I mean, I'm just saying.
No, I haven't.
There's no way to get past that, which I don't necessarily want to. I'm just saying that it's just when you say, "Oh, it's definitely erotic," it's like, aren't they all? If it has throuples or anything, aren't they pretty much all just going to be in the erotic genre there?
Yeah, it tends to be that way.
And I said it can be sweet at times.
Exactly.
So in romance, I'm just saying this. I mean, I'm going to say
it really does. Yeah. I would say that compared to Gilded Lies, which I read for the last Who Gets an HEA, this is a lot more spicy than that. And they were not it wasn't a throuple, but the main character is bisexual and he has a girlfriend and a boyfriend. It's just they don't all interact as a throuple. But that one was not. It had a little bit of spice because it had like one scene in it. And even that scene was written, it wasn't a graphic representation. So when I'm thinking erotic, I'm thinking th're saying it's graphic, so you know exactly what is actually happening. They may be saying some slang terms for different body parts and other stuff. So there are levels, but yes, everyone that I've read seems to have at least some spice in it. Yeah, so I really like this one, and let's hear about some others. Since we're kind of in that same vein of talking about plus size, Mary, why don't you tell us about your recommendation?
Sure. I am going to recommend Spoiler Alert by Olivia Dade. And why I think it's wonderful for this podcast, if you don't mind. So this is the cover.
Yes.
But the dedication in this book is amazing. It says, "To everyone who's ever doubted as I did, someone who looks like you can be desired, someone who looks like you can be loved, someone who looks like you deserves a happy ending. I swear it."
Oh,
And
I love that.
I thought that was appropriate for this. So I had not been a romance reader previously. I picked this up because I love fan fiction. And these two characters are fan fiction writers. The girl that's April and Marcus. And April has this online writing best friend. And she finally gets brave enough to post a picture of herself in cosplay on Twitter, and all the trolls come out. So the star of the show sees this happening and is like, cut it out. She is lovely, and asks her on a date. And then while they're on their date, he realizes he writes fan fiction, and he realizes that they're fan fiction best friends. So they have this thing. So that kind of starts the miscommunication trope, because he doesn't know if he can trust her, because being a star of a show and writing fan fiction could go poorly. So there's a miscommunication trope there, but their love is really, really wonderful. And as someone who's lived her whole life in a fat body and had never seen the representation like this before, because April is as well at a place where she loves herself. She acknowledges that she is fine, and anyone who has a problem with her, that is their problem, not hers. Like, that's where she is. And I find that really refreshing. So they get together and things are wonderful. Like, there are some times where in the beginning he made some missteps, because, he's this Hollywood attractive star who's never had to deal with some of the things she has to deal with. So he had to navigate that a little bit, but he did so really lovingly and really well. And another layer of representation is he has this persona, because he's what he calls the lovable golden retriever. Like, his energy to the public is just this like totally vapid but friendly pretty boy. And it's because he has dyslexia. And so he was asked to read something out loud once in an interview, and it went very poorly. So after that, he just kind of took on this persona where all he talks about is his hair and workout tips, when actually underneath there's a very deep character there. But that was a protective thing for him. So I think that's always also interesting. The representation in this book is really good. There's at one point when she is calling out the fan fiction, like her community, for at times promoting stories that have fat phobia and what that can mean, and even what it can look like, because there are times when, like in secondary characters, when fatness is used as shorthand for greediness or laziness or slovenly, and how harmful that is. And
exactly.
She made she wrote an email to this community of people that I thought was really moving. And then another thing is her mother is someone who tries to support her, but still harbors so much internalized fat phobia that she's unable to show up for April in a positive way. So there's a conversation where April sets boundaries with her mother and how she's allowed to interact with her. And I think that conversation is really important because I think that's a struggle a lot of us have, are needing to have those important conversations and set boundaries. So I thought that was really a really nice thing to represent. And spice level, I mean, Olivia Dade writes spicy. It's not erotica, but I would say R, like that NC-17, like it's definitely there. Right, it's definitely graphic, but the story is still the forefront. I'm trying to think if there's anything else to share because I just adore this book. And I think if you are looking for a step into fat representation, this is always my go-to recommendation.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you on that. I did read that one a little while ago as well. The other thing I wanted to know with that one, is that a book one of a series, or is that a series, or is that just a standalone book for her?
There can be read as standalones, but there's 3 in that have, so like they're all actors in this Game of Thrones style show, and there are 3 books that have the actors in those books.
Okay, all right, yeah.
And they all of her books have fat representation. That's all Olivia Dade writes. So
yes, actually, and like all of her covers are just like that. And actually, I think is her latest one. Both of the characters are plus size in the latest one.
They're both plus size.
Yeah, it's a heterosexual couple, man, woman, and they're both plus size. Yeah. When I, just kind of started reading romantic comedies a few years ago, it wasn't as much representation out there as it is now. And seeing like Olivia Dade come out with, a couple of things and come out with these covers and making sure the covers look like the people. That's what really stood out for me with her before I even read one book by her, is that the covers actually look like the people. So you may be getting, with some rom-coms, you may be getting a plus size person, but the cover doesn't show that. The cover might show a skinny person. And so I love that about her. I love that about the book that I recommended, Misadventures of a Curvy Girl, because it had representation on the cover, which it just brought me in. So let's talk about some other representation.
I have a question.
Yes.
All the Fields. Sorry.
Yes.
Is that part of the series, or is that part
All
of
the
that
Fields
group?
is.
Okay.
I'm sorry. That's book 2. That's actually Marcus's best friend Alex. They're in the story.
Okay.
So,
just wondering. I had that recently.
Oh,
that's my other question. Sorry.
Oh, cool. Oh, but that's awesome. So I guess that'll be the next one that I'll be reading by her, All the Fields. I will let you know. So let's go on to a couple other recommendations. Marcie, what about your recommendation? I believe this author is one we've talked about before.
This author is one we've talked about before. My recommendation is An International Affair by Iris Bolling. It is part of a new shorter series that she's doing of the Lassiter weddings, because the book that I talked about before was the last of the Gems and Gent series. It was the book about Luke. So it was the last one that talked about the main characters in the family that Iris started, the Lassiter family. And so this is the wedding of Luke and Sasha. So we started to learn more about their romance, and they were kind of like insta love. They met, the spark was there immediately, and they just kind of fell into a relationship that will ultimately lead in the end of that book in them being engaged. The marginalized characters in my case are African American characters. And the reason that I like Iris Bolling in general, and the reason I picked this novel, this book, is because, in her series, is because the representation of these characters is atypical to what you normally see. Sasha is an interpreter for the UN. Luke is a scientist who's also a government operative. The Lasseter family is very close to the president of the United States. Their parents, Luke's parents, Sally and Joe, have been married for their entire lifespan of all of their kids. They are happily married and they so into the relationships of their children in relating to one another and in relating to all of their spouses of all different types. And so I don't think you see that representation of fully formed African American characters, families, men in general as well, and especially not at the level of careers, genres, spaces that these family members are operating in, as opposed to what I typically see in a lot of urban fiction. And so for me, that was like one of the main things that kept me going back, was looking at these characters and looking at one of the most positive representations that I often see. And then to add to that, the romance of these characters, and not to say that they don't have issues, or that they don't go through something to be together in some of the novels, but it's they're fully formed relationships. And so in this one, we see the wedding for Luke and Sasha, and one of the biggest hurdles that they're challenged with is Sasha's mom, who has largely been living her life off the proceeds of the money that Sasha's father has been sending to support her. And even though she's become an adult, the place where Sasha and her mother had previously lived was bought by her father and was fully paid for. He paid for her schooling. And so they've been living a pretty lush life. And as Sasha evolves into her own person and separates from her mother's lifestyle then changes. And so while everyone else is gung ho for this wedding to be pulled off, Sasha's mom, not so much, because she sees that she feels like no one is recognizing her in all of this. And so there's like the monster-in-law kind of vibe. There are all these antics where she tries to, and it's not clear necessarily that she's trying to break them up, but she's trying to benefit from their relationship. She feels like she should be treated as well as Sasha's being treated in this new bargain with this new family. And at first, she has some apprehensions because she has some assumptions about Luke based on his parents and who he might be. And so she doesn't realize who her daughter is marrying in terms of his status or his financial background. And so once she starts to find out those things, then it makes her even more gung-ho to try to ingratiate herself into the situation so that she too can be taken care of in this new scenario. So the biggest part of Luke trying to manage that is by suggesting that they get married in international waters, because it kind of represents their relationship, their vibe, but it also allows them to only have the people they want and to kind of really insulate themselves. Originally thought maybe Stephanie wouldn't come, but if she does, at least they can manage her because she's on a ship with the rest of the family getting ready for this wedding. So the concept of the international affair is that they've moved the wedding to a cruise ship in international waters. They're going to get married as soon as they cross into international water. There's all kinds of hijinks and shenanigans that happen on their way to the altar. But at the core of that, you also see a lot of advice from Sally to Sasha. You see a lot of Sasha seeing what positive relationships with parents is like. You see that Sasha's not the only one that has a monster-in-law, that several of the other couples. Actually, one of them is that the groom that married into the family had a crazy mom, and then another one is a bride that married in. But you see that she's not the only one, and she learns from those people's experiences as well. So you do get to see all these different types of family dynamics about families and how people interact with one another, especially as adults, especially as people become new families, right? When you build your own family unit. And I think we were talking about boundaries and how you create those with people who might be considered toxic to your personal well-being or the well-being of your
Exactly.
family. So I think
Yep.
the way that it's navigated in these stories, I think is pretty interesting, and it keeps the story moving. In terms of heat level, I would say sweet, steamy, bordering on spicy. And it's funny to say that because in some of the previous ones in the series is definitely spicier, but actually Miss Iris says she got some feedback that some of hers might have been too spicy. So in
Oh
these,
my.
she kind of pulled back a little, and while the scenes are still there, they're not quite as spicy as some of the previous novels would have been. So it's interesting to see, but it's
Okay.
still a good read. There's still a lot of good scenes. And I think if you're looking especially for a fun summer read, it's a really good one. But honestly, if you're reading the whole series, you will want to. I think sometimes we see that the implication of the happily ever after, right? We see that they're engaged at the end of the story and then boom. And so it was a nice continuation to then see them actually get married. And so the series is that in the book of Luke, 3 of the couples were engaged at different periods in the end of that book, and all 3 of them get their own. All 3 of the couples get their own wedding novel in this series. So the next one, which is A Risky Affair, comes out at the end of July 28th, and
Oh
it will
wow, pretty
highlight
soon.
it will highlight another couple in the series, the baby of the last of the family, Sapphire, and her fiance, who's a mayor he's a mayor of Richmond in this story, but LT Palmer. So it's nice again to see what happens after and not to have to imagine in your head how they got married, did they get married, or find out in 10 books later there's a mention of them and they got kids, and you're like, well, what happened? So it's really nice to see this kind of continuation, and they make for a really fun summer reads.
Well, that's cool. And if the show notes for this come out before that order date, is her book on pre-order? Do you know?
It is on pre-order
Okay,
on her
we'll have that.
website,
We'll have that
irisbowling.net,
information then. Okay.
irisbowling.net, or on Amazon.
Yes, and I think she's Amazon well, not Amazon exclusive, but she sells her books on Amazon and on her website, and those are the only 2 places that you'll be able to find them. So we'll have all that information
Thank you.
on the show notes. So let's talk about some more representation. Dana, how about you? What about your book?
All right, so let's get into it. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so the book that I am recommending is actually called Redemption, and it's by Kenya Wright. And the first thing I kind of want to start off with in terms of recommendations, I want to talk a little bit about trigger warnings. So this is a book that has some of everything in it. Like I mentioned earlier, like I don't just focus on romance books. I like a whole bunch of other stuff mixed in there. And I went and read some other reviews while I was preparing for this. And I know some people were not happy with some of the scenes in the book. And some people mentioned that they thought there should be trigger warnings. Now, I have to admit, I'm part of Generation X. I guess it's Generation X. Like, as a Generation X person, I don't even care what the generation is, right? This is just, we didn't grow up with trigger warnings. It just wasn't something that we did. So I'm kind of torn on how I feel about it, because I understand the need for it, certainly. But as an avid reader, I don't like when I get those trigger warnings, because it's like giving me spoilers. So I'm kind of torn. Like, there's this show that I absolutely love called P-Valley. And I was watching it the other day, and it had a huge trigger warning before it. And so the whole time I'm trying to figure out, what character is this going to happen to, right? And I'm trying to guess instead of really paying attention to the show and just being surprised by the moment. So that kind of throws me off. So I'm like, how do we do this so that we give people who need trigger warnings, and those that wish not to see them can avoid this. So I do wish there was some way to do that, because I've had books and literally first page in is like trigger warning, blah, blah, blah. So I wish there was a way to skip that if you don't want to see it, and see it if you need to see it. So just FYI, I don't know how to do it. I'm a critic, so I'm not actually making any helpful recommendations. No, I'm joking. I'm just here to say, what can we do so those who need it can get it, and those who wish to avoid it because it may lead to spoilers don't have to see that. That's what I'll say with this.
Okay, so you brought it up, and even though this is a recommendation episode, this is my podcast, so I can do what I want. What do we all think about trigger warnings now that you've brought it up? Because there are some, for all of us, I'm not sure about Marcie's book, but I think maybe for all of us, there might have been an instance where there could have been a trigger warning.
Not for mine necessarily.
Not for yours?
No, but I was thinking P Valley in that whole show, trigger warning. I mean,
yeah, I was thinking that whole show is just a one big.
Well, but some of it they don't consider trigger warning. No, they just, because this is life, deal with it. But there are certain things that they do, for health reasons. They may tell you there's strobe lights and things like that, which I think that kind of stuff is fine. But then there are other ones that, because I'm not trying to put trigger warning on anything, I won't go into. But there are other things that they do bring up. That certainly would be triggers for some people. That they talk about.
And I think that's the thing is, especially, to Dana's point, in this version of society, I think that a lot of things could trigger different people. So I think it's harder to know. I mean, I think that there are some that are generally accepted that are gonna, but I think that people's trauma is different. And I think that because of that, I think what I would read and trigger nothing could the very next person be like, yeah, that really hit me in a certain way. And so I think that it's hard for me. I would not want someone to walk into a book unaware and then really be traumatized by what they read. So I do think a synopsis should indicate, or at least infer, this is going to be heavy. I sometimes do also, like you, Dana, I looked through the whole thing and I didn't see anything that triggered me, but that doesn't mean it wasn't the next person. So I think in content, it's more effective. I think it also is undervalued because people use that phrase all the time to say
the actual
that
phrase
I was triggered, or I was triggered by this, or I was triggered by that, or and I think that it might be becoming overused to the point that it may not be impacting the people who really need to know this subject matter is important. And so for me, I think that it should be used for content that we should be more mindful of how the term is used in general, so that it holds the same value.
I agree.
Yeah. What do you others think, Mary?
I think trigger warnings, they're important, but I think there are ways to do them where they're not just right in the book. Because I understand wanting to just read it for pleasure and not have that taken out of your journey. So a lot of what I've seen them doing is saying this book contains triggers or is a dark romance for a complete list, and then it'll give the author's website. And one even had a QR code where you could do it and it would bring up the entire list.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably where this conversation is going, because it's a new conversation. Like, it's relatively new. So I think that they're working on figuring that problem out. I do think that it's important because, like you said, like, being triggered is a physical thing. Like, if you read a story that has traumatized you, it's a physical reaction. It's not being offended. That's not a trigger. So I think that we do need to watch how we use the word, but they are important. And I think that they're making steps to do it where everyone can get what they need.
Yeah. Now, Staci, do you have any thoughts on this? Or
I mean, nothing really to add. I mean, I do agree that trigger warnings are necessary depends on what it is. And I do believe that it has been overused at times for people like find things offensive. It's not really a trigger, you're just offended by it. So I don't think it's the same thing. But I do like how you just said that they're doing the QR code so that if I know that I can be triggered by something, instead of putting triggered by this, and this, and it's like, if I'm not a person that's triggered, now I know parts, what's going to happen in the story and not look for it. But if I can do a QR code, because I know there's certain things that may trigger me, I can do that. And I think that is a great idea. That's kind of the happy medium between the two. Because I'm not really, again, I'm like, sometimes with Dana, when I see something that says trigger warning, I don't really look for stuff, but at the same time, because I know there's a trigger warning, this is what's going to happen on this next part,
Exactly.
and it does
Yes.
kind of tell me that. And now it's like, tell a story well, so I know, because I knew this was coming. I do agree that it is necessary, but I think people have overused it to the point where, for some people, it's like, oh, it's a trigger. It's just triggering me. And it's like, so you don't like it? No, like, then that's not triggering. You just didn't like it. That was not,
Right.
that's not a same thing as being triggered.
I agree with everything pretty much that's been said. And yes, I have heard of some authors that are starting to do links to triggers, and they'll say, like, maybe in their description, their book description, they'll say this book has trigger warnings, and then they'll do the link. A lot of people, before they started doing the links and the QR codes, they would have the trigger warnings, but it would be at the bottom of the list where you couldn't really see it unless you said see more. And then there have been a few authors that say, this is a blah, blah, blah book. If you don't like this book, so it's not necessarily a trigger warning. It's more like a deferring from the people that are offended, right? Or the people that just, I don't like this, and that's also kind of why we talk about heat levels here, because to a certain extent, I mean, we laugh because, we all kind of like the same heat levels, or we're tolerant of different heat levels, we should say. But there are some people that are they just really will put a book down if it has a sex scene in it. They do not want to see that. They will put a book down. They won't, read anything by an author. It's not necessarily a trigger warning, but they give kind of this book is a dark romance with blah, 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 so that you kind of know what you're getting into beforehand. Part of it is, yes, authors are very much sensitive to their readers. Part of it is authors do not want to see a book returned because they were offended. It's a marketing thing too. It's like, we want you to know up front, because we don't want you to sit here and then review our book and give our book a 1-star review because you didn't like the one sex scene that we had in it, or that you didn't like this, that the main character used some curse words, and you're not, person that likes curse words. But as far as trigger warnings go, we're very sensitive about those kinds of things now, because now we have that knowledge that we need to be sensitive about it. Also, because you really don't want a reader to go in having a bad experience because of your book, or to have to go to therapy because they read your book or something, or have to have another session of therapy because they read your book. That's the antithesis of the whole reader experience. We want to have a good experience. We don't want you to have a bad, traumatic experience or make you relive something. That is the conversation about the trigger warnings. I'm Gen X myself, so, I've read some stuff back in the day that I should not have been reading that really probably triggered something in me. But it was just kind of like, yeah, we just read stuff, we just experience stuff, we read stuff. If we don't experience it, we read about it. That's kind of the motto that I've kind of always had. Either you experience it or you could read about it, where you don't have to experience it. But and then you learn something. So Mary's right. It's a new conversation that we're trying to navigate as authors. As a reader, for me, I agree with Dana and Staci, and Marcie as well, is that there's this, I want to know, but I don't want to know, right? I don't want to, limit my whole experience. I don't want to limit that whole, like, when you open a book and you're like, I'm about to be on a new adventure. I don't want you to tell me, okay, there's rocks ahead, there's all of this stuff happening, because that diminishes it a little bit, right? Yes, I agree with that. But at the same time, if I was a person that, if I saw those rocks ahead, that would just cause me traumatic pain, or that would just, I would want to know. So it's a weird place to be right now, and we're all trying to navigate it. So Dana, with this particular book, did she give trigger warnings, or did she not give trigger warnings and people said you should have given trigger warnings?
So I did not see any. So I don't think she did, because the reviews I saw, people were saying that there should have been. So I don't think that she gave them. So let me say this. If you're offended easily, this is not the book for you. So okay. I'll put that out there. If you're offended easily by anything, just don't read this book.
Okay.
Because let me tell you, this book has some of everything. I had to write it down. It's a slow burn. So if you need it fast and hot now, you're not gonna get that. There's some murder in it. There's some body gore. There's some pictures. There's some humor. There's some racism. Like, it's got everything in this book. And so if you find, like, I couldn't even narrow it down to tell you who this book is not for. It's easy just to say, if you get offended easily, this probably isn't the book for you, because you can find plenty of things in here, but it's like real life, right? There are plenty of things that people probably could find offensive if you're that type of person.
Okay.
So I brought all that up just to say this book has a lot in it. And so it may not be for absolutely everybody. Now, the reason I chose this book, so there are two main characters. We have Ebony, and she is a Black female. And then we have Yushiro, and they call him Yo-Yo. He doesn't like that, but Yushiro is his name. And he is Japanese. And the reason I picked these two characters, first of all, this is a genre that I think I particularly like, because I think in real world, Black women and Asian men, I think in terms of representation, tend to be lower on the totem pole. So I love it when I see them get together and do things magical. So that's why I tend to look for these Black woman, Asian male romances. So that's kind of when I do go in and I'm typing what kind of things I'm looking for, that would be one of them. So the thing about Ebony is she has 3 kids, and she's in an abusive situation from her husband, and his name is Wyatt. And she's basically running from him. So she's running from him with her family. Now, I'm going to go ahead and tell you some of the things that people were disturbed by is in the initial first thing is you're going to run into some of what that abuse looks like. The thing that I actually liked about it is because oftentimes, and this may sound horrible, but I'm just going to keep it real with you, is oftentimes we treat children as if we can't touch them, in terms of when bad things happen in TV and movies, so never children. But in real life, there are people who don't feel that way, who don't take into consideration that, hey, this is a child. And so that happens in this book. And while it's horrible, it's also realistic. So I was like, just to start off from this, I was like, wow, we're going here. Okay. So again, if stuff like that may offend you, this may not be for you, but it led to me, it actually made the situation even worse, right? So it kind of, I don't know, it made me feel more about the characters and more about the situation because it felt more real. So anyway, she's been on the run from her husband for over 3 years. She's out, her car breaks down, and she happens to be near a house. So Yvonne, this is kind of going back to your situation where your people were kind of stuck together because this is in the middle of a snowstorm.
Yep, forced proximity.
Yeah, exactly. So they're in the middle of the snowstorm, and they meet Yushiro, and he basically takes them in. And he has a house with a guest house in the back. The guest house isn't ready, but eventually the idea is maybe they can go and stay in the guest house. But it has snowed so bad that they're literally stuck here for the time being. Now, one of the things, tropes and stuff in this book, and I don't like it, but it's try finding a book with Black women and Asian men where somebody's not in the mafia or part of a killing family, or somebody's not having babies. Good luck, because that's how, so somebody please make more books with Asian men and Black women that don't necessarily fall into those. But yeah, so
I know one, but then at the same time, that one was written for a particular brand, and they toned down things, and we'll talk about it later.
Yeah, so this isn't toned down. This is definitely going to be spicy for you. But as I mentioned earlier, it's a slow burn of spice. But when you get the spice, it's gonna make you sneeze. It's spicy. So he takes them in, and basically it's a romance with thriller. So they fall in love. But in the meantime, the thriller part is her ex-husband is looking for her. And so it gets down, there's some family issues and things. I'm not, I don't want to give you everything away, obviously, because I want you to read the book, which is why I would recommend it. But I really like, because these characters, Kenya wrote these characters really well. I even like the children. And Staci knows that's not my thing. But these three kids, they all had their own personality, and they were hilarious. That's another thing. She writes characters. They were funny, but not in a, this is not a comical, a comedic romance. I wouldn't say that. But all these characters I just felt like were very real. And I thought she wrote them very well. And then again, to the sex scenes and the spice, I even thought the way she wrote those was very real. And I don't want to tell you what I mean by that, because I don't want to give anything away. But the characters talking to each other during those scenes, things they were saying to each other, I thought was very real. It wasn't just, ooh, ah, baby, yeah, throughout the, conversation. They actually said stuff that I felt like real people would probably say to each other during these things. Like, not that this was one of them, but like, oh, do you smell something burning? That might come up, who knows, if somebody, they were like, so I actually like that kind of stuff. There were two dogs in here. So the main character, he likes music. He likes rap music from the 80s. He named his dog Salt and Pepper. Like, there's so much personality in this book. I can't even get into all of it. But again, there is some death. There's some body gore. There's a lot of stuff you may not see coming. But overall, I think Kenya wrote she did some very well-written characters that I think you'll enjoy. You'll have fun reading about them. The slow burn, we've had slow burns where you're just like, get it in already.
Yes. Yes.
I don't feel like this was like, it was slow burn. And of course, there's tension. But I'll tell you, when the tension, she gives some good writing, I felt like. So this is definitely something that I would suggest. Now, I will go ahead and warn you that I read this a couple of years ago, and I did it on Kindle. There were some grammatical issues. Just FYI, sometimes y'all may have heard me say before, when I see those, they can take me right on up out of a story. But the thing that's neat about Kindle is they can be corrected. So yes, she may have
updated it. Yes.
So you may not see that. And also, one of the things I was happy to see is this is also available on Audible. Please, 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 more writers of Asian men and Black women also look at doing things on Audible, because that's the easiest way for me to read books, is to actually listen to them. And there is like a handful of books on Audible for that. So I would like to see more of those types of books make it to Audible. And I can only imagine that, as a Black writer, it's hard enough to write it and get it, in book form, like Kindle and Amazon, with all the things you have to compete with, and, where you probably have to start in the beginning. But I feel like if we could get more representation up in the Audible, I would appreciate that, because I think books like this and other books, like, the more people who have access to them, so, aside from just reading the book, then I feel like the popularity could potentially grow, because the majority of the books I read are probably through Audible.
Now, with that, do you remember if it was a single narrator or two? Oh, wow. Now, was it a dual narration with like definite differences? Like, yes, we knew this person was okay.
Oh, it's a man and a woman. Totally.
Okay.
Who they are. Yeah. And that reminds me, one thing I did want to show. Somebody actually wrote a joke, and I haven't seen this, but they were like, don't ever do this with the Audible. Don't ever go and look up who actually is reading the book. Because it takes, like, if we've had Audible narrators who we love, and then you go and you see they don't look like you thought they were. One thing I mentioned this book, and I want to show you, is this book has illustration, guys, that if you listen to Audible, you probably didn't even know they had, but these illustrations are hot. Now I'm going to show you this one. This is probably the only one I can show you. There's another one, ladies, I'll show you offline.
All righty then.
I don't know if you can see that, but that's one of the illustrations that, and that's probably the tamest one that I have that I can show you. But this caught me off guard. Like, I'm reading through this and I'm like, whoa, what? I was not expecting to see illustrations. And some of these illustrations they're great. They really, really are. So yeah, illustrations just aren't for kids.
Right. But hey, that's cool. That's cool. Adds more to the experience. I was going to say something else about, yes, just a side note. Yeah, I think that's why Christian Fox does not show his face.
Because he sounds beautiful. The man sounds great. Yes. But yeah, I have no idea what he looks like, and I'm okay.
And that's not even his real name. Yeah. I tried to look him up.
Don't ruin it for yourself.
No, never do that. Unless you the person, like when we were talking about you last time, we were talking about who read for that, and Ed Westwick does some reading for some fantasy books and stuff out there, so it's like but anyway, so I really like the conversation about trigger warnings. But and I like the whole conversation that you had, the recommendation about the book. One other question: is this part of a series? Is it book 1, 2, 3, or is it standalone? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Some people actually said they would have liked to see the kids grow up and see them have their own kind of romance thriller stories that kind of come out from that, which I thought was interesting, right? But that just goes to show you that people actually cared about the kids, because they did have a good amount of personality in this book. So I thought that was interesting. But yeah, it's a standalone.
Okay. All righty. Good conversation. But last but not least is Staci. So Staci, tell us what book you're recommending.
I'm recommending His Muse by Twyla Turner. And the reason I'm recommending it was, like I said earlier, when we were talking about when we first started reading books together, and that was for a long time I hadn't read any romance novels, or I wasn't really currently reading a lot. And so in the past, when I first started reading romance novels way back, in the day, they were always the same. And it was really predominantly, well, not predominantly, it was always, it was a white, male and female characters, heterosexual, 2 people. And if it was, anything like Renaissance, Victorian era, Regency, typically he was older and she was younger, because that rarely the same age, that kind of thing. And so after our first book we read, I think it was Awestruck or Starstruck, I read another book by Twyla Turner. It was His Muse. And so this was really different for me in the sense that it was the first time I had read a book where the woman is older than the guy. And in this case, it's interracial, but to me, that's secondary to the fact of the age difference. And in this case, it was the main character. Her name is Turin, and it's actually flashback kind of a thing. It's actually, she's written something like a memoir, and it's given to her daughter. And her daughter is kind of reliving all that happened there. And her daughter is basically almost reliving what her mother went through when she was younger. And it starts off like she's in her 40s, because when I read it, it's like, oh gosh, she's also in my age bracket too. So it's like, oh, really into it now. And she's divorced, and her husband is remarried. And I'm not telling much of the story. That's just like you get that within the first 10 pages. Her husband's married, and I believe he married his former mistress secretary. But her and her husband are divorced, and they have an adult daughter who's just graduated from college. Well, she's not I'm just the the first wife. It's not first wives club kind of a thing, because it's really has really not a whole lot involvement with the husband, but she's taking the money that she's gotten from her divorce, and she's basically reliving, rebirth of her life. And so she does talk about in the beginning how midlife crisis is a crisis for men, but it's a rebirth, or for a woman. And so her premise is she moves to a different country, and this is actually, I think, Will Diva. We had just Marcie and I just came from Paris or whatever, so that also gave me that vibe when I was here. She moved to a different country, and she's starting the whole travel business. And while she's there, one of her friends introduces her to an artist, a man named Etienne. Hopefully I'm saying that right. And he's younger than her. He's actually older than her daughter, who just graduated from college, but still not that much older from her her daughter. So he's like in his early or mid to maybe late 20s at the most, but not, and she's, like I said, in her early 40s. And of course, in that kind of situation, she's fighting it because she's like, he's too young for me. And she does talk about how she is and her physical. She talks a little bit about how her shape. And of course, it's not, I'm a fashion model, supermodel. She talks about, she's giving birth to a child, soft tummy, thicker thighs, but she doesn't really carp on it. So that's also a lot of things I like about it. It's not the only thing that defines her.
Right. It's not a struggle book.
Yeah, it's not really a struggle book for that. But she is the age difference. Like she finds him attractive, and he seems attracted to her, but she's like, he can't be attracted. I can't be with this guy who's young enough to be my son, depending on how early she wants to start. But I mean, this is somebody who, is just that big of an age difference. So she does the trope that, I'm not sure if that's a trope, but meet my daughter. She's just lovely. That kind of thing. Avoiding it, and tries to introduce him to her daughter. And he makes a point. I'm not interested in your daughter at all. But of course, the daughter's like, he's just wonderful. This is, oh my God, sorry, spoilers, Bridgerton, season 2.
Bridgerton, yes, that's exactly what I was going to say was Bridgerton. And yes, we spoiled it. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
So, but her daughter's like, oh my gosh, I like him. He's really nice, da-da-da. And he just makes it clear, I want to be with your mother. He does say that at some point. And of course, that tears the mother and the daughter apart because of that. And that's also why you have it in flashback, because the mother's written her memoir and all that. But I like it because they do broach on subjects. I'm not going to go into too much detail about, it's spicy. So, just know it is spicy. It has some great scenes in it. So, but what it does talk about is some of the things that I think about. Because when people say age ain't nothing but a number, I was like, do you know who the person who wrote that? It does matter.
Oh boy.
It really does. He had 30 years to prove it. Age, there are things that come up if you have a age difference. And especially when it's for anything, but with women, like if you're, one of the things we was concerned about him, like, I'm in my 40s, I'm not going to have a kid. If you want that, there's not,
Exactly.
And so they do acknowledge those things. They do talk about those things, and they do, I don't want to tell anything, but I mean, they do those things that are coming up in their whole relationship. So it does feel not like a fairy tale, like, oh gosh, nothing shall set us apart. There's actually real things going on, and real things that, I think if you are in a person with that kind of age difference, you should be talking about, earlier in the relationship versus later in the relationship. One of the things I didn't like about it, well, of course, her daughter, Carrie is her daughter, and she's, you don't know him that well. Why are you that mad with your mom? And I think part of it is, up to a point, jealousy in a way.
Yeah.
Jealousy that that a man will find her mother more attractive to a mother than her. Like, I'm the young version of my mom in a way, and she's so angry at the mother. And I really could understand that. I mean, I could see why she's mad, but not to the point that she got as mad as she did for someone you just met. This wasn't like y'all were dating for 2 years and y'all getting married and your mother stole him. It's like your mom introduced you in the hopes that maybe he would throw attention to you, but no, he still wanted her. And yeah, I could see maybe your pride being a little bit shaken because of that, maybe. But at the same time, the whole thing was her mother and that relationship and how that was kind of blowing up because of it, which I really didn't. It's like, okay, it wasn't to me that deep. But she made it that way. And it did make it for a good story because of it. But also thinking about those relationship, that kind of jealousy toward her mother in that way, but also because her mother was like, I guess, a stay-at-home mom too. So she was used to having, my mom is doing this for me. You know, that kind of, my mom was the one who stayed at the house and did all the stuff for me while dad was working. Now that she's not getting the one thing kind of that she now wants, it's her mother's fault. And she's like, now she's becoming more of a, a daddy's girl. It's like, your dad left your mother for a secretary. But I mean, that's, she didn't give you that guy she wanted. You wanted it. I mean, that's just the end of it. But I did like the fact just that in their relationship of Turin, her name was I believe I'm spelling right or saying it right, Turin and Etienne. They did talk about the issues that I really think if an age difference couple would talk about, and then her insecurities on it too. Because let's face it, she thought by introducing to her daughter, he would go for that because she is younger. She is the young, early 20s, everything's perky, that kind of thing that he should be going for. And it wasn't what he wanted. And so, and even though she didn't seem like I'm a person with low self-esteem, she wasn't, but she was like, as a realist, like, this is not what the media, this is not what society tells you.
The outside, right.
That should be what you will want. And is there something, is he really a starving artist? He thinks I got money. I mean, there are some insecurities because of it, but I would think it's the insecurities of anyone who's outside of what the people will say is the norm. Granted, she didn't live or die by it, but she did still have those thoughts. And I think anybody would. It was like the first time I've read anything like that, because typically, like I said, this was before we first got started. I was not reading a whole lot of different romance genres and, different races or age groups or whatever. And so this is like the first time age-wise where I saw the woman being the older one and the man being younger.
Right.
But I really enjoyed the book.
I'm glad you enjoyed it. The one that we read was Rock the Curves by
okay.
Twyla Turner. Yes.
Right after that. So that's the first one I read right after that one.
Yeah. Dana, you had a...
I was just going to say a side note, because that's another thing that Staci brought up, that as an older woman now, I find it hard to find those books with older, a reasonably, like, I'm not looking for necessary, the May, December, whatever, romance type of thing.
May, December, yes.
Yeah, the two older people, like, and look, I mean, no offense to anybody who writes these, because I think we need all of this stuff, right? So I think we need some of everything. But we do not get it like I'll open a book and it'll be like, oh, I just, I'm late for my college class. And I'm immediately like, ugh. Like I'm looking for some older people, because when you're that age, there's certain things that you do that are at that age make sense, right? Because you're learning, But as a mature reader, I'm over that. I have passed that on. And so I'm looking for something a little bit more mature. Again, I feel like we need all of that, but trying to find those mature ones are very, very hard.
Yes.
Especially forget trying to, then narrow it down to, interracial and all this other stuff, if that's what you're into. But I do think that's something that's very hard to find. And I don't understand why. Because aren't the majority of the people reading these typically older?
Yeah.
Well, I think there is one book. Was it Royal Holiday?
Royal Holiday, yes. They were in their 40s. No, I'm sorry. The female main character was around 45. The male main character was in his early 50s, I believe. But yes. There's very few, kind of out there in those. You have to really dig to find them. But I will say this, a lot of people are writing more older characters now. They're writing more in whatever age group they are in. They are writing those characters. I would say I see them more in women's fiction than I do in romance, which means, it's not necessarily a love story. Sometimes women's fiction has a love story in it, but it doesn't have to have an HEA. And it's really about the main character going through an emotional journey. So it's kind of at the sweet spot, right? Where we're going through kind of a different phase in our lives. And so we want to explore that. And I see a lot more writers writing women's fiction with older characters, but it is coming around in romance. I think it's getting there. It's getting there.
I'll say I went on a spree of Carolyn Brown at some point, and I think she is considered women's fiction, to your point, Yvonne.
She is considered women's fiction.
But that
woman has like a lot of books out there.
Yeah, but she has a lot about older women characters.
She does.
And adult mature relationships.
Yes.
And some second chances, some first chances late in life, some all kinds of things. So I did run a spree of her stuff, Dana, that was more in that age range of older women. But I think you're right. By and large, there's few and far. I know even when I'm on Kindle Unlimited, when I find one and one of the main characters is like, I don't know, 38. I'm like, ooh,
yeah.
You're right. You're like, oh my God,
38.
They're 30s. Right.
Right. I'm like, let me read this one.
Yeah, but I will agree too. It does need to be more representation, right? Because just like with plus size, there's a whole gamut. I mean, there are people who are plus size and struggling with that, and we need those stories for other people who are struggling. There are people who are plus size who are accepting, and then there are people who are just like, I just don't like this body, I'm trying to lose weight. Now, we don't need to see all that because we've seen it before, but just like there's that gamut there with plus size, there's also a gamut there with age. And the reason why I'm kind of saying this is because I just got some results of a book that I put in a contest. And it was interesting. One of the comments was like, I had to remind myself that these people were in their 40s because they're so focused on being in a relationship and stuff. And don't they have other things going on? And I'm thinking, well, one, you only read like 3,000 words of it, so you don't really know exactly what all they have going on. But the other is a single person in their 40s has a different lifestyle than somebody who's married with kids in their 40s. Or even someone who's married or who's divorced in their 40s or divorced with kids in their 40s. It's a whole different feel there, and that's why representation matters. It's because we don't want to see just one version of this. Right. We need to have a gamut of this. We need to have more than just one or two here and there. It needs to be more than just His Views by Twyla Turner. It needs to be more than, what we've seen, because there are different parts to being that age, right? To being that certain age. Just like, somebody in their 20s, they, for a little while, they had new adult, which is kind of going out of style to a certain extent. They had new adult just to differentiate the really young people who just got out of college from the other young people. And it's like, if you think you need more representation here, then you obviously need more representation for somebody's in their 40s. Also, it's not just somebody's in their 40s, but beyond that, right? And, this, of course, brings to mind the movie, Good Luck to You, Leo Grant. And I know Staci wants to talk about that.
Well, I mean, when you were saying about the young and old, and then we were talking about the different genres, but that movie was just, to me, great. I mean, it was amazing. And I'm not going to spoil anything, but when you see it and then her whole point of why she was doing that. You know, the whole point of why she is seeing Leo Grand was, you know, that whole point and how she lived her life
Exactly.
in that box because that's where she was supposed to be, and you know, and wanting something different. Now, I don't necessarily recommend the way she did it all the time for other people, but the fact
Right.
that she found. I don't want to spoil anything, but I mean, I just liked that movie. It was quite a surprise for me. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
For representation. Yeah.
yeah,
Mary,
but
you just.
I think another thing that I have found in, because I have to dig deep to find fat representation sometimes. And I have found that the more intersections, the more the older the character usually is. So like Twyla Turner's character is Twyla Turner is one of my favorite authors, and
She's
they tend to
awesome.
be bigger and older. Like they just do. With an Olivia Dade has one called 40 Love with an older woman, and I think that when you are taking care to write good representation and representation that is intersectional, a lot of times you get work that is not just skinny young pretty white people falling in love.
Right. Right. Exactly. Yeah. And two, with a lot of Twyla's, I've kind of noticed on her Instagram that yeah, she goes places and actually researches stuff, and she's writing from who she is, right? Like her main characters, a lot of times, if I'm looking at her on her Instagram and I'm reading her main characters, her main female characters, I'm like, yeah, she's writing what she this looks like her. I mean, she's representing, you know what I'm saying? She is representing that, and she's showing that representation out there. And she researches her characters and stuff too, because I think she just came from Scotland or Ireland or somewhere, and she's got like Scotland because she's got this Scottish series that just came out, or she's just finished or whatever. But yeah, it is really about that kind of like intersectionality kind of thing, because part of that is not just we need more representation, but we need to show these people as real characters, and that is the key there. Like for instance with Marcie's books, and the fact that they all have these whole lives. We need to see everything about these people's lives, and that's why we're recommending these books. And with Dana, with her book, we need to see the whole picture of what's happening here, no matter how gruesome that picture is. And that's why it's not just about representation, but when we do representation, what makes it good and makes it recommended is that these people are whole people. They have whole lives. They are relatable. And the key to that is that intersectionality, and so that's what does it. That's what does it. I have had so much fun, y'all, talking with you about these books, about our faves. And the next time that we do Who Gets an HEA, we'll be talking about interracial romance. And I know a couple of you already had some interracial romance books that you want to recommend. And then after that, we're going to maybe wrap up this series. We'll see if people want it to come back, but we'll maybe wrap up this series with plus size representation. And so we're going to have Mary come back definitely for that. Actually, Mary, you can come back whenever you want. We will be looking forward to talking about those books with you. So make sure that you are subscribed to Nerdy Romantics Podcast at nerdyromanticspodcast.com. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcast. We are just about everywhere. So make sure you're subscribed so you can get the latest episode. Thanks, everybody, for coming out. And thank you out there for listening. So that's all for this episode. We've got a new website at nerdyromanticspodcast.com. But don't fear, all of our episodes and their show notes are on our new website. While you're there, please consider donating to our podcast with the donate button at the top right-hand corner or the buy me a coffee button on the show notes for each episode. Your donations go straight to keeping this podcast on the air and keeping all of our episodes out there for you to listen to whenever you want to. If you want to get our show notes in your inbox, please consider signing up for our Nerdy Romantics newsletter. The sign-up form is at the bottom of each page on our new website. Thank you for listening.